What's your I finally met my online friend horror story? Story 1. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this jerk roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fists. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what? Come stay with me. Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly, I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. Story 2. A guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job posting in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and thought, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and on the way back, I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrived, and it turns out he didn't have an apartment lined up, and he hadn't actually gotten the job he applied for. I made a bunch of phone calls and found him a room to rent that would let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I was tired and frustrated with his lack of planning, but I figured it was worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my friend. Then he broke down and confessed that he hadn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and masturbating. They'd never talked, texted, or emailed each other. In fact, she didn't even know he existed. His plan was to hang out at a game shop she talked a lot about until she showed up and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet, and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my friend buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and became even more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. Story 3. Flashback 15 years ago. I was talking to a person online I'd known for a few years. We weren't best friends, but we talked daily. Seemed like a nice guy. At some point, he asked where I was from, and I mentioned that I lived in Philly, and I was going to the art institute there, living in the dorms. Didn't give specifics other than that. Most people knew I was an art student at the time. I posted it about regularly on LiveJournal. A few days later, I come home from class and see a message on AIM. Figured out where you live? I'm outside of the dorms at the cafe across the street. Meet me. This guy lived on the West Coast, and after finding out where I lived, he makes an unannounced trip across the country, tracked down the building where I lived in, and was camped out at the cafe across the street, asking him to meet him. All of this without any heads up. I immediately felt uncomfortable and didn't really know what to do. It's one thing to meet up, another thing entirely to make a trip cross-country and camp out in front of a person's residence. I didn't answer the AIM message right away and needed some time to calm down and think, get more rational. More messages started coming through, each reading slightly more hostile than the last. Okay, this guy traveled all this way. It'd be a dick move to ignore him, but at the same time, I felt like I was seeing red flags everywhere. I was legitimately creeped out. More messages came, and each time they started to get more agitated, more impatient. He started asking for my class schedule so he could meet me outside class, asking where I'd be going, where I usually ate, what time my dinner schedule was. He started getting weirdly specific about wanting to know about every facet of my life. I was getting full-on stalker vibes. So I lied and told him that I was visiting my sister and that I'd be back over the weekend and I'd just miss him. That's when he said, "That's fine, I can wait." And he did. 3 days later, he's still there, still messaging me that he's still at the cafe waiting. What the f*** are you waiting for? Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me you were coming? My privacy was having huge issues with all of this, and it got to the point I started feeling legitimately scared. I made a decision. Rather than meet him, I'd log out AIM, create a new handle, pretend I never existed at that point. I completely abandoned my live journal and started posting under a new name, and went so far as to change my entire online persona. I never heard from him again. Story 4. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with, and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed, if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he'd ascended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick boog. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, he was a nice dude, but I wound up ollieing out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack, it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know? What do you even say? Story 5. I never actually met the guy, but spoke to him on the phone. We'd met on MySpace when I was in college and exchanged email addresses when we realized we lived in the same town. Eventually, I gave him my phone number and made plans for him to call me. When he did, his voice creeped me out. It was how I imagined a serial killer would sound. By the time I got past it and was comfortable talking to him on the phone, I started noticing other red flags. Whenever I brought the neighborhood up, he changed the subject. At one point, I asked him what his favorite restaurant on the boulevard was, and he hedged, so I made up a restaurant that I said was my favorite. He immediately said that was his favorite too, and that he especially loved one of their dishes. He went on and on about this wonderful place that didn't exist, and there wasn't a similar one in town, so he couldn't be confused. I called him out on the fact that he'd obviously never been to my neighborhood. Turned out he didn't even live in the same state as me. Story 6. I met 2 LiveJournal friends. I'll call them Adam and Betty. Adam came from the East Coast, Betty came from the West Coast. They met in the middle and vacationed in my state so all of us could hang out. Betty was fine. Exactly the same IRL as she was on LiveJournal. Really pretty too. Adam, though, oh my god. The first night we met up, we were going to karaoke. Adam and Betty would drive to my house, meet my mom, and pick Twin and I up to go to the karaoke bar. Betty doesn't drink, so she'd drive the rental car. They knocked. I opened the door. Missy, my elderly terrier mutt who I love so much, immediately made friends with Betty. Betty walked all the way in, backing Missy up, and then Adam walked in. It was like a switch had flipped. Miss Dog lost her shit. She did the I am going to kill you bark, hackles raised, tail tucked between legs, snarling, snapping, and it sounded like she was screaming. Mom asked me to help get the dog under control and in the back room, so I did. Mom said she was worried about this guy Adam and wanted me to be careful. I said Missy was obviously freaked out about him too, so I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. So we went to the karaoke bar. Betty ordered pop. This was a non-issue as she was a devout Mormon and didn't drink. I ordered pop, and Adam immediately started trying to talk me into alcohol because he knows I drink. Hard nope, dude. Being young and naive, I said maybe later rather than trying to pressure people to drink is a dick move and it makes people think you're a creep. Twin, who was still presenting female at the time, ordered pop. This surprised me because he was going through a huge party phase. He spent most of his free time drunk. Adam started trying to talk Twin into alcohol too. No, I have a headache. Beer will make it worse. We did karaoke. It was unremarkable. We went home. The next day, Betty flew home. She just changed her ticket and bounced. She gave us the details in a filtered LiveJournal entry saying that Adam wouldn't stop hitting on her and she didn't feel comfortable being in the same hotel as him. We all blocked him. Thanks for watching. If you have your own story to share, leave it in the comments below. Who knows, your story might be featured in the next video. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more story videos. See you next time.